Extremely timely seminar, What We Want in the next Commissioner of the Met. Got obviously star-studded panel, some leading authorities, all of them speaking to aspects of the current London policing situation, a crisis which some view to be as great as any in the course of its history. But particular pleasure for me to quote, all our panellists will speak for 5, 6, 7 minutes. And then we'll open it to the floor for question and discussion between all of them. So great pleasure to be able to introduce one of the things in great old age as I now have, and I possess, is that I can say all sorts of indiscreet things, and Lord Stevens of Kirkwhelpington here for many, many excellent reasons, not least of which is he's the only commissioner to have left the Met in recent times with a clean score sheet in multiplicity of ways. So delighted. We've been working for years to get you on this platform, Lord Stevens. We finally succeeded. Great. Feel a great sense of nothing.
Work. They look, they're high.
A great triumph.
Okay. Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I don't think anyone can come to any other conclusion that the Metropolitan Police is in crisis. You just have to look at some of the instances that have happened in the last year. It's been a gradual progression. And I think some of us, if not all of us, have been massively shocked by some of the things that have been reported. Behaviour officers up at Hampstead Heath, the Everard case, appalling, the behaviour at Charing Cross, and so it goes on. I could go on and on and on. And I'm not going to do that because I don't want to depress myself too much. There is no doubt now that Metropolitan Police is in need of reform. Not evolution, but reform. And that reform, I think, has to come along the same lines that Sir Robert Mark got involved in. I think the standards that have absolutely crept out of the door and seem to be non-existent have to be reinforced, and reinforced in a ruthless way. And by ruthless, I mean to say it's got to be absolutely made clear to those people who staff the Metropolitan Police, and we've got some very good people who staff the Metropolitan Police, let's not get it wrong, that they cannot and will not be allowed to get away with the behaviour that's gone on over the last year or two. The thing that really hits me is that these people have the confidence to do and say what they say and think they can get away with it. Well, that has to change, and Sir Robert Mark led on that, and I think CIB too, and some of the things we actually brought in at the time of Michael Howard as Home Secretary, well, around that period of time, in relation to the Lawrence inquiry and the recommendations need to take place. There has to be total and absolute ruthlessness in terms of dealing with this. And certainly my day and Paul Condon's day, and certainly at the beginning of my commissionership, I was prepared to go in front of 2,000 to 3,000 officers at a go, just around the corner here. Put over the message that came from the top that what we were going to do was going to happen. And then that was reinforced by a very strong anti-corruption policy, which was also reinforced, believe it or not, when I went around the world saying what we had, people couldn't believe it, especially in America. We had integrity testing, where we put people in cars, black people in cars, black police officers, and if they were stopped in a way that wasn't good enough, then we would do something about it. Slightly agent provocateur, but who cares? If you're dealing with the type of behaviour we're dealing with now, we really do need to do something. The Metropolitan Police now needs a very strong leader indeed. It's not going to be for the faint-hearted, and it will be a he, because we're down to 2, I'm told, yeah. And he will have to pick his own team who are the same ideas and same focus as he has. We've got to get back, dare I use the word, to basics. The performance regime in the Metropolitan Police is now non-existent. Burglary rates, I'm told, detection rates are 3%. And it goes on and on and on. And a very great friend of mine, who's a very senior police officer, spelt it out to me last week. They had a robbery outside his house, where he had cameras, and it took 11 days for someone to come along and see him and get his witness statement. He then inquired how many people were patrolling in Kensington on the beat. 1. Now that is totally, totally unacceptable. I think the race issues, which some people up here know that I was involved in when I became Commissioner, the talking has to stop. We have to get back to neighbourhood policing, we have to relate to people who come from ethnic minorities and get on with what we need to do. Beyond all of that, the new Commissioner needs all our support. He has an incredibly difficult job to do. He's going to have to bring together the Mayor of London and the Home Secretary, and I don't know who's making politics out of it. Maybe you do, but someone is. And we have to support that individual in everything he does. I think for me, I'd like to see a contract drawn between him, the top team and the Home Secretary and Mayor, and that contract is a two-way process. Like we had before, if you came, I came and asked for finances, and I know Bill did this, my great friend Bill did it, you have to deliver what you promise. If you don't, go away. Leave the job and go and do another job. There seems to be a fair number of commissioners who seem to have done that. And I thought I'd like to add, actually, I was offered another 2 years after my 5, so, but I didn't take it, I can assure you. My luck wouldn't have stood that long. So, in all, we are in a time of crisis. In all, we have to have firm leadership. In all, we have to have action rather than words. And those actions and those words, the people who actually talk them, have to mean what they say. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill Bratton, most distinguished former NYPD, LAPD Commissioner of our times. Pleasure to welcome you back here. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you to the Policy Exchange for the opportunity to be here. Policy Exchange was the first entity to invite me back in the 90s, my first time to London. It's interesting that my good colleague mentioned Robert Marks, because he was the first Metropolitan Police Commissioner that I met in 1976. I was a newly promoted young sergeant in a reforming police department led by my personal hero, Robert de Grazia, who was the type of leader that effectively you need here. He was a change agent. He was an extraordinary communicator. He was tough as could be, and he brooked no interference in the sense of his change of the culture of the Boston Police Department that I was preparing to leave because it was corrupt, it was brutal, it was racist, it was incompetent. And that was the Boston Police Department that I had yearned to join for most of my life. In the space of 2 years, he totally turned the department upside down and changed it. And one of the reasons he brought Sir Robert Marks over, that's the correct title, is it Lloyd Marks?
No, Sir Robert.
Was to talk about how to deal with corruption, how to deal with all that Marks was being charged with. And because Marks was, in that era, an extraordinary leader for what he was dealing with at that time. And Marks changed my career in a phenomenal way, because he introduced me to Sir Robert Peel's 9 Principles of Policing. It has been the foundation and my Bible for my whole police career. The 9 principles, when you read them intimately today, they are more appropriate to the issues in the Metropolitan Police than they were in 1829.
Yeah.
The first one, the basic mission for which the police exist is, and these are the 5 most important words in the police profession. Why do you have a police profession? Why do you have us? The basic mission for which the police exist is to prevent crime and disorder. And disorder. In the 70s and 80s in my country, for a variety of reasons, and I think it was going on here, because of cuts in the size of police forces. Boston Police Department I joined in 1970, 2,800 officers. In 1980, as the superintendent-in-chief, I had a rapid rise through the ranks of that department, thanks to Bob de Grazia, the commissioner, basically identifying talent that he wanted to promote up. I had to lay off 25% of the Boston police force due to budget cuts, including every police officer hired back to and including my recruit class in 1970. Very challenging times. But he also allowed me to understand the importance of not only going after crime, but after disorder. You have other terminology for it over here, but it's the aggressive beggar, the graffiti, the prostitute, the hooligans on the corner keeping people up all night long. And I learned early on, because I was given the opportunity to run a neighborhood policing program, that as a young lieutenant that was so successful, it caused my elevation to jump over dozens of others to become the number 2 in the Boston Police Department, to implement it citywide. And it was neighborhood policing. And it was modeled, interestingly enough, after the Metropolitan Police of the 1970s. Panda cars, the idea of rapid response, 2 officer cars to respond to serious crime, but also the idea of officers who were still walking the beat, who were dealing with the neighborhood issues, who were dealing with those so-called broken windows that George Kelly wrote so eloquently about. And what happened in my country in the 70s and 80s, and I think here, as police basically were wrestling with the changing dynamics in my country of drugs, guns, youth violence, we did not focus on quality of life crime at all. I understood, because of my background, that you needed to do both at the same time. You could not get crime down if you couldn't deal with quality of life at the same time. In the 90s, in the transit system, and then as the NYPD, had the opportunity to prove that theory, and then in Los Angeles in 2002, and in New York again in 2014. So the challenge, or one of the many challenges for your new Metropolitan Police Commissioner, is going to be having to implement all the criminal justice policies and reforms the Inspector of Constabulary is placing on him, the MOPAC plan of the mayor, the Home Office with all their issues. He's going to have to be a juggler first and foremost to basically keep all those balls and plates in the air and not have them crash to the ground. But you can put all the reforms and policy changes and rules and regulations and guidance you want into an organization. But in a police organization, if you still are not successful at reducing crime and disorder, you're not going to be successful. Because what is it that people expect of the police? Not an 11-day response to a serious robbery outside your home. They want you there within a few minutes. And they want you there to take care of that gang that's keeping you up all night on the corner drinking. The idea is that, as I think about what's going on here at the Metropolitan Police at the moment, in just the 2 days I've been here, the idea, this is not just a Metropolitan Police issue. Sounds like it's a national policing issue in this country, where you have 7 of your 43 police agencies that are now under basically oversight by the Inspector of Constabulary. That oversight is very similar to the federal consent decree I had to implement in Los Angeles, where I had a federal judge with 750 guidelines that I had to meet as chief of police, while still responding to my police commission, while still responding to my mayor, while still responding to the needs of my men and women. So in terms of where you are at the moment, I'm reminded of the Dickens book, Tale of Two Cities. Best of times, worst of times. Certainly, the worst of times are quite clear, all the issues that have been outlined. But it is the best of times also. And I say that advisedly, in that the selection of the next police commissioner, that person has to be an optimist, they have to be a leader with a vision, with the capability to collaborate, with the ability to basically bring people to common ground, not just the public, not just the politicians, but as importantly, the men and women of the department who is going to have to lead. And so going forward, the issue for that person is they're going to have to be an extraordinary communicator. They're going to have to be able to deal with the media, deal with the public, deal with the labyrinth of political issues they have to deal with here. But I see that from my perspective. I've always sought to go into departments in crises. I don't want to come in behind this guy. Nothing to do. You want to basically, I would see right now that this opportunity is the best opportunity in policing in the world at the moment. Why? Because everywhere you look, there's something to fix, something to work on, something to get excited about. And that's something else that you want in that leader, to be excited about the opportunity to become the foremost police leader of the foremost policing organization in the Western world. I've led New York, I've led Los Angeles, I've led Boston, but those assignments pale in comparison to the Metropolitan Police with the diverse responsibilities they have. And if you can fix this, you can, there's an old saying about New York, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. If you can make it in London, boy, you can make it anywhere. That's right.
the famous line of a bit of Whitehall wisdom, choose your predecessor with care. That's what you're saying in another way. And Sir Trevor, the wisest man I know, has violated that rule instantaneously. But we're always delighted to have you on our platform as our senior fellow for just about everything, Trevor. You're the answer to every public policy question at any given moment, but not least, obviously, you are the founding chair of the Greater London Authority, and the London mayoralty aspects of this are crucially important. Also, obviously, as a former chair of the Equality Commission, and always look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Dean. I now feel as though I would be disappointing the audience if I said a single word. Maybe I should just shut up now and leave you with the illusion of wisdom. I come at this from the advantage, actually, of having spent, best part of 20 years worrying about London and, amongst other things in London, its police force, as we used to call it. I had the privilege, as presenter of the London programme, of interviewing on an annual basis, I think, 4 different police commissioners: McNee, Newman, Imbert, Condon, I might have forgotten one, and then I had the privilege of as chair of the London Assembly, of interrogating John on his estimates, and he taught me a great lesson, which was the capacity of an especially authoritative figure to turn up beladen with scrambled eggs and uniform and so on, and intimidate the hell out of the members into offering more and more money. But anyway, I take John's point, a very interesting point, which about where we are and the image, and you summon up, in a way, a kind of police force which brings to my mind the image. I don't know if how many people in this room are old enough to remember A Clockwork Orange, but there was a moment in which what Kubrick's idea, which was that the police force and the criminal classes essentially came from the same group, and it would be hard to tell the difference between them. Now, I've always thought that was nonsense, but I know that there are many people now who are not a million miles away from taking that view. And that is a pretty disastrous place to be in. Were I interviewing the police commissioner now, I think I would be asking some serious questions about the kind of person that is being recruited and the manner in which they are managed and the norms that are being set within. I mean, you know, the old term canteen culture, I think, I personally had some shortages. There's some myths about it. But in any organisation, there are norms of behaviour which, you know, if you are in it, get you on, and norms of behaviour which, you know, do not get you on. And it seems to me that in the Metropolitan Police, for whatever reason, the norms of behaviour that are extant now are the worst that I've seen for many a day. And I go back, frankly, quite a long, or not quite to the Cray era, but pretty close to it. In the question we've been set, the exam question we've been set, the part I would like to deal with is the bit of the sentence, 2 letters and sentence, the we. Because I think there's an important sort of precondition to answering the question we've been set, which is, who is the we in this question? Who is it that the Metropolitan Police actually have to satisfy? And if I were to think about a strategic problem that faces the cops right now, is that they don't know, haven't really asked, and don't particularly want the question answered. And there are lots of reasons for why that is the case. But right now, you're a commissioner, you have the Home Secretary, and he or she appoints you, and maybe he or she might be able to sack you, but if you're quite smart, you know, if you're somebody like John, you'll never get sacked, because you always know how to outwit them. Then you have the mayor, who doesn't really have power, but can be a mighty pain in the arse, and also can conspire in order to do in a way that will deprive you of funds. So in some way you have to deal with that individual, and I think where it's slightly different to, say, New York, actually, is that we have a political position, and I frankly plead guilty to being party to creating this, which has the capacity to create substantial mischief without the power to remedy the mischief. And I think that's a big problem for the Commissioner. And the third is London itself. And I just want to dwell for a few moments on that. What do most Londoners actually want from the cops? And we've heard some of it. They mostly want, where it is possible, because everybody now is realistic, for their stuff not to be stolen, for their children not to be menaced on the street. That if something happens to them, that somebody at least demonstrates an interest, even if everybody knows you can't actually fix it. And I think that the problem that the Met has at the moment is that none of those things is in any way true. What is even worse is that we are now in a frame, and I haven't got access to the detailed engagement survey and internal surveys of that the Met has, but I am pretty sure that they will be telling you that we are now in a situation where Londoners basically think it's not really worth bothering to interact with the police. Now, why does that matter? It doesn't just matter because it's a problem, but it means that actually, day by day, the gap is growing between the citizen and the citizen in uniform. In the days when you actually felt there was some reason to talk to a cop, then at least you might find some fellow feeling. You might find out that they kind of knew what the name of your street was, and that might give you some warmth. But actually, if you can't even bother to pick up the phone because you know nobody's going to answer it, and you don't see one from this year to the next, why would you have any connection with them? Secondly, there is the issue of dealing with conflict, and I think many Londoners want the conflict which exists on our street to go away. And I'll be absolutely blunt about this, and this is, by the way, a problem of politics and it's a problem of the media. There are more than 100 young men being killed every year in this city. Many, many, many more being maimed in unpleasant and vicious ways. We do not hear a single word about it, actually. The police think about it a bit, but in a sense they appear to think it's not really their problem, it's happening somewhere else. Why is this an issue? Well, of course, because all these people are black. Literally, almost all of them are black. And of course, let's not beat about the bush here, the perpetrators are also black. Now, this is a feature of a problem in this city, with which I think New York's quite familiar, but has found ways to deal with, which is that increasingly crimes which affect some parts of our community do not affect other parts of the community. Consequence, there are big chunks of London who don't really give a toss about serious crimes which are happening to other Londoners. And that's a city problem in which the police have a role in remedying, but politics should also have a role in remedying, but is currently playing absolutely no part, is absolutely silent on. And that's another reason that there's a problem for the cops. All of these are issues of trust. And I just want to come lastly to a sort of broader, sort of structural problem. At some point, I think, if Londoners, if they thought about it, would want somebody finally to make a decision about whether the Metropolitan Police is a city police force or whether it is a pretend FBI. It has been, and partly successfully in different times and different environments, been moderately successful in straddling that. But as London becomes more and more unlike the rest of the country, that is becoming almost impossible to sustain. And somebody at some point is going to have to decide what really matters in London police forces performance. And lastly, there is an even deeper internal problem, which is that we live in a city which is very divided. It's divided rich and poor in a way that in other parts of the country is kind of unthinkable. It is a city which is divided by experience. I mentioned one way in which that is true, and it is divided increasingly into smaller and smaller communities. And part of the problem that we have in answering the question, what do we want, is that just if you think geographically or if you think ethnically, there will be at least 20 or 30 different answers to that question in London, each of which is internally valid, but each of which is probably in conflict with at least a couple of others. And until we start to dismantle and disaggregate those questions, we cannot really answer that question. And I think my criticism, both of City Hall and also to some extent of Scotland Yard, is that neither group currently seems to want to even contemplate that is part of their problem and that they need to address it.
Great pleasure now, my left flank, to call upon Nick Timothy, former Joint Chief of Staff to both Prime Minister and before that to Home Secretary, a very consequential Home Secretary, I think, by common consent, and a very important period. Obviously, the Home Office is Home Secretary is the ultimate arbiter here, and would just be very grateful to reflect on your experiences. Always welcome on our platform, Nick. Thank you for stepping in at short notice for your erstwhile partner in crime, Fiona Hill, who's unavoidably detained on professional matters. It's really hugely appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like old times being dropped in it by Fiona, but here I am. Yeah, I suppose I'm here because I spent 5 years in the Home Office, and it is no exaggeration to say that all my hair fell out in those 5 years because it's so difficult to get that department to do the things you want it to do, and in the end you normally succeed, but actually the one thing I remember trying a lot and failing to do was to get the department to refer to the police as a force or forces, because they were always insistent it was a service, and I think it gets to the heart of some of the things we've already talked about and I'd quite like to say. So I suppose I'm here to say what it is that a Tory Home Secretary might want from the Commissioner. And it may sound crude or unsophisticated or old-fashioned, and I am probably all three of those things anyway, but and we can talk about the complexities, but the objective of the police, as Bill said so well, is to cut crime and to catch criminals. And this is a surprisingly controversial thing to say when you're talking about policing, especially to some of the newer generations of police leaders. I remember writing a speech for Teresa at one of her first policing conferences where she made this point, and some of the chief constables in the audience were absolutely furious. One of them marched straight over to a news crew and live on camera said the Home Secretary clearly doesn't understand policing. I probably only spend about a third of my time thinking about crime, which I think is a big part of the cultural problem. Because of course there's complexity. You've got to deal with issues of leadership, of procurement, of technology. You've got to communicate with the public. You've also obviously got to work out what your tactics and strategies are for cutting crime. You've also got to contend with all sorts of social issues. But if you're not clear about the objective, the purpose, if you're not strategic about delivering it, if you're distracted from achieving it, if you think your role's bigger because you think it's more social or political or intellectual, then your founding purpose actually isn't what the public expect of you, then I think you're setting yourself up to fail. And as I say, I think this is actually quite a common problem across a lot of police forces in this country. My home city is Birmingham, and in the West Midlands there was a spate of really horrible homophobic assaults in the gay quarter, I think towards the end of last year. And the response of the force wasn't to be honest about the perpetrators, and it wasn't to get tough with them or anything like that. The chief constable attended a pride march wearing a rainbow-coloured feather boa, and of course it's important to show empathy and public support, but empathy is not enough. The job is to prevent crime and arrest wrongdoers. And I think similar to some of the problems that we've seen in New York where the police have pulled back from doing their jobs, we saw there was an interview quite recently with the new Chief Inspector of Constabulary who said that the police will have to take into account the rising cost of living when they come to address things like shoplifting, which to me is absolutely horrific. And there's a second related problem here, which I think is the clear mismatch of expectations between the Home Secretary and the Mayor in terms of what they want from the Met. So Pretty wants somebody as Commissioner, I think, who is I was going to say conventional. I'm not sure it is conventional anymore. Maybe neo-traditional as a kind of crime fighter. Whereas Sadiq as Mayor is more interested in somebody who's going to look at some of these cultural issues in the force. And it's not to say there aren't cultural problems within the force, and I'm certainly not somebody who thinks that to be tough on crime you just have to be sort of relentlessly pro-police, whatever the context. To be tough on crime you've got to be a police reformer as a Home Secretary, I think. And we've obviously seen the quite awful list of cases that John started to list in his remarks. But some of these are pretty serious. We've had the Daniel Morgan inquiry say that the Met is institutionally corrupt, and there are themes running through these problems about accusations of misogyny, of racism, the abuse of powers, and so on. And all of these things need to be addressed, but so too does the leadership culture that told police officers to take a knee before quite violent protesters, that goes softly on public order policing, that is failing to investigate burglaries and all sorts of street crimes, and is quite selective about some of the laws it wants to uphold. So we need change, but we need to avoid some of the proposals that I think are coming from some quarters, and I suspect the Mayor would be sympathetic to, in terms of inquiries that will take lots of time, that will be distracting, that might make recommendations based on fashionable political opinion. And nor do we want sort of bizarre conclusions that you see from certain police leaders where they've said they accept that they've over-policed certain communities. Obviously, we want the police to be able to investigate and to do their work without fear or favour. We should want them to be open about tackling misogynistic culture, but they should get on with it and get rid of the cops who are displaying that kind of behaviour. We should be open that there actually is a problem with racism in the force, but that doesn't mean that you should start pulling back from policing certain communities. It doesn't mean that the police should be embracing disputed ideological theories like systemic racism, which I think risks destroying merit and hierarchy and focus in the police. But there's quite a lot of work for the Home Office as well. So in my time, one of the things that we did that I think went badly wrong was to establish the College of Policing, which was supposed to set up a good evidence base for what works. And I think it's actually just perpetuating the kind of problem I'm describing, where it's more interested in policing people's pronouns than it is in policing the streets. And actually, I think the issues that Trevor described in terms of the governance and accountability for the Met really need to be addressed. So basically, the way it's supposed to work is the Met is accountable to the Mayor for policing London and accountable to the Home Secretary for its national responsibilities. What that really means is they can play the politicians off against one another. It means that the Home Office is tempted to intervene in an ad hoc way where it shouldn't, and it means that the Mayor, especially this Mayor, can basically avoid responsibility for his duties. So I've long advocated moving the SO functions from the Met into the National Crime Agency. But if the Home Office thinks that there is systemic failure inside the Met and that the Mayor isn't doing his job, the Home Office should be prepared to consider intervening properly and taking his powers, and not just intervening in the kind of ad hoc way that it does. So it's a huge job. It'll take plenty of reform, but we need to be really clear about the strategic objective, which is to keep Londoners safe by cutting crime and arresting criminals, as controversial as that may seem to some.
Thank you. Our guests have all kindly agreed to answer questions. Usual house rules, no question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first, so I'm sure there'll be many. Yes, gentleman there, if you just wait for microphone, name and organisation.
Thank you very much. Phil Rosenberg, PR Office. First of all, thank you to you, Lord Godson, and Policy Exchange for this panel, which is both outstanding and timely. Two brief questions, if I may. The first is, Nick referred to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, and I wondered what the panellists thought of the infrastructure around police accountability, the IOPC, Her Majesty's Inspectorate. Is it working? What could be better? The second question is, if the police were here to defend themselves, so to speak, they might say, we've got problems with funding, morale, politicisation. How would you respond to that?
Nick, do you want to take first? And then
Well, I think I should say that while the college didn't work out in the way that we wanted, one of the best things we did was make the inspectorate much more independent of the police, and I think Tom Windsor is here. Appointing Tom to that position was really important in that respect. I mean, it's not much of an exaggeration to say that the inspectorate used to go and investigate a force, they'd have draft findings, and then the chief inspector would sit down with the chief constable and talk about what would go in the report, which is not the right way to do things. But it should be independent of the Home Office too, and I think the inspectorate got a lot better. I mean, the IOPC, I think those things are they operate in very difficult environments. It's probably we probably suffer from a lack of investigators who aren't themselves police officers, which I think makes life difficult in this kind of field. My emphasis would be on the college, where I think it hasn't worked. We need an entity like that to be able to improve the evidence base and to improve standards across the board, and that's where we're suffering, I think.
others.
If I could speak to the second part of your question about what might the police say in defense of their inefficiency or their issues. Going back to my own experience, 1970s in Boston, New York City, budget issues, which you're very familiar with here, required, as I referenced, that I not only had to reduce the force from 2,800 officers down to 1,544. We closed half the police stations. We shuttered the police academy. We got rid of the police museum. We disbanded the police mounted unit. We disbanded the police harbor patrol. The impact of that in 1980-81, when I became police commissioner in 1994 of the Boston Police Department, we were still dealing with the legacy of those officers who had been laid off and then returned to duty. Anger, 13 years later, some of them lost their homes, some of them lost their families because of the pressure of those cutbacks. New York City went down to a total, I think, 17,000 police officers. Currently has about 34,000 because of those budget cuts. And what happened? New York, Boston, around the country, crime began to increase. There was no attention paid to disorder control. And in the 80s, combined with the increased use of drugs, guns, violence in my country, 1990 was crime year in the history of America. A direct result, I believe, of well-intended but poorly implemented budget cuts. You've had the experience here recently, I think, within the last 10 years, where you cut 20% across the board of your police forces. Boom. At the same time, you were, in a well-intended effort, creating a new level of influence, civilian control over your chief constables by creating the position of an elected mayor, police commissioner, similar to the American system of a mayor who appoints a police commissioner. I've worked for progressive left mayors. I've worked for Mayor Giuliani, Attila the Hun. I've worked for both. I'm a centrist, that I have to work with both. But The impact that I have seen of that, reading some of the reports that police commissioners here for the last several years closed 39 police stations. You got rid of Grams Hill. You effectively had to reorganize to deal with those budget cuts of the organization, and that reorganization impacted significantly on supervision, management, response capabilities. I reference that because in my city, New York, at the moment, we're dealing with a similar issue, and I'm talking about the political influence and control over police in the sense of the budget, policies, and procedures. That New York City 2018 was the safest year in the history of New York City. Safest in the history of the city. Murders down 90%, overall crime down 80%, disorder, literally the 8,000 open-air drug locations were gone. The subways were safe at night where young women could feel comfortable 3 o'clock in the morning coming back from clubbing and not being concerned. Within 1 year of legislative reform, well-intended criminal justice reform, bail reform, etc., New York, after 25 years of straight crime decline, within a year, it was gone, wiped out. And progressive district attorneys didn't prosecute for minor crime. So New York right now is a mess in the sense of a growing crime problem, growing disorder problem, and as been pointed out, a police force that is basically stepped back and disengaging. And in some respects, that mirrors what's going on here. But a lot of that is basically, as much as you can in fact rightfully blame police leadership, police officers for their actions, whether it's corruption, inefficiency, incompetence, indifference, all those things. A lot of it was effectively created politically, the atmosphere for that to grow because of, again, the enormous budget issues you were facing, evidently, whatever year that was that you began the 20% cut across the board. What do you expect when you cut your police services by 20%? 11-day response to, you just don't have enough cops. That's going to be one of the challenges for your police commissioner, to fight like hell for more cops because there are not enough of them. You have a city that's twice as large as Los Angeles. You have a police force that's smaller than New York, police service, and effectively you spread much too thin. And you're also talking about an enormous hiring. God help you. If you try to, first off, based on some comments from the Chancellor of the Exchequer the other night about how difficult it is to hire people, God help you try to find 10 to 20,000 young men and women that are going to fill the needs that have been described up here. Compassionate, racially mixed. You're at risk of hiring people who are going to be problems for years to come. So it's the next police leader here, boy, you've got to get the best damn person in the world because that person is going to have extraordinary challenges to face. And if you're lucky, you will face them successfully.
I want to talk about resources, then I want to talk about HMI. I was an HMI for 2 years. I dare I admit it. I do. I'll start with HMI. Yes, we were ex-chief constables, and some of us were selected because we were successful chief constables to go on the inspectorate. Michael Howard was part of that in relation to myself. It could have been a cosy relationship, and perhaps it was on occasion, but I can assure you it wasn't on a lot of occasions. The thing that hit me very hard recently was that Metropolitan Police had 70,000 crimes, street crimes, that not have been recorded. I remember vividly going to one of the largest forces in the country as HMI, and their recording system was completely skewed. I wouldn't say corrupt, but you could say corrupt. And as a result of a conversation with the chief constable, which was pretty hard, he changed that overnight. Now, he could have either done it that way, or I could have exposed the force. So all of that was going on. So the HMIC, yes, it did need some independent, of course it did. It needed independent experts in to deal with things that were needed, and during my time that was the case. Now I want to talk about resources. In 1999, the Metropolitan Police consisted of 24,762 officers. We were losing 400 a month, and Trevor knows about this because I was jumping up and down in the assembly in relation to it, and he was highly supportive. Within 5 years, thanks to the help of going over and seeing what was happening in New York and coming back and using that, we went to 33,000 officers. In that time, complaints against the Metropolitan Police, bearing in mind there were another 5,000 to 7,000 officers on the street, were halved. The Metropolitan Police, as a matter of record, was up the top satisfaction rates publicly, and we couldn't believe it, in the country. It was Devon and Cornwall up it was. Now the reason of all of that was because the resources were there. We did have tremendous support from City Hall and Ken Livingstone. I really must pay tribute to that man. And we had Home Secretaries, Jack Straw and latterly David Blunkett, who actually were there to support us, and a Prime Minister. Now, what I was saying early on about whoever the new Commissioner is, and God willing I think I know who it's going to be, everybody has to get behind it. Politicians and all the kind of, it's been described to me as politics of the worst kind between the Mayor and Priti Patel. Nobody can get in the way of where the Metropolitan Police are trying to go, to make the streets safer, and they should be judged by public satisfaction, and of course, as you've all said, they should be judged by safety in the streets, that people can walk in the streets where they live and work and feel safe. It's not asking too much, is it? So Trevor.
Oh, just very briefly, I think if I were in the Met and I were hearing this conversation, I might feel a little exasperated that the core of it will feel like a conversation that could have taken place 20 years ago against a background of, number one, a crime landscape which is quite different. So, for example, one of the areas where they are woefully behind every single day is on fraud, white-collar crime, cyber, all of that, completely being kicked around the park by criminals, basically, because they're faster. They can summon more resources, and they can get the. I want to be careful how I put this. They can get the right human resources to do their job, whereas law enforcement is finding it very difficult to match. The other side of it, of course, is that technology is also important in remedying. One of the biggest things that has made most difference in public confidence, I mean, ironically, it's part of the reason that we have so much evidence about the racism within the police. It's body-worn cameras. Made a huge difference to what we know. It's also, we think, making a difference to the way that cops behave, actually. Now, that's just a simple bit of technology. It's taking forever to roll it out, but it will get there eventually. And I think that if I were in the police, I would probably be saying, please, stop having arguments about things which these days have not marginal impact, but less impact than they used to. And please also think about resources, not just the quantum of resource, but the direction of resources, because actually the political argument, to be honest, is about policing as it might have been in 1995, rather than as it is going to be in 2025.
Thank you. Okay, time not limitless. I just want to get a flavour from online and from the floor just how many people might want to ask questions. If you direct future questions towards any one individual panellist, that would also be of help. I see a question from Jonathan Foreman, former editor of City Journal in New York and former New York Post correspondent. Jonathan, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, we hear you. A little louder, maybe.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful presentation and fascinating. What I would like to ask is a question about if any of the panel believes it might be possible to create the kind of cultural transformation that the Met seems to need. I mean, people talk about various institutional problems, and one of them, from the point of view of the public, is what looks like an institutional reluctance to be out in the street. I mean, you can walk around in London and there's an almost total absence of uniformed officers on the street, and it's resented. And it's not just a matter of resources, because, you know, if you go into Hyde Park today, you'll see a van full of rather overweight officers driving around chatting to each other, but no one walking in the park. So it does feel as if there's been a withdrawal within the force that's completely unlike any other city, well, in the Western world and maybe the Eastern world as well, where, you know, everywhere else still uses the P-light sort of tradition, whereas here it feels our officers have become a bit too grand and too important to do that boring old walking down the street, talking to people, preventing crime.
Take more questions as well if our panel can answer them. There's a sort of race plus of questions. Christine Elliott, IOPC. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thanks very much indeed. I'm a recent joiner of IOPC. I'm not going to address the comments that were made about that, but I do want to say two things. The first is that on digitisation and data, Trevor Phillips is absolutely right, and this is crucial to getting the evidence as well, that the police need to solve some of the economic crimes. But the other thing, and I feel that I probably have been out on response patrols more recently than maybe some of the illustrious panel members, and have sat with many perfectly slim police officers in those cars, that the wider question of failures in other parts of the system also needs to be addressed. Do you have any idea about the massive amount of mental health issues that police have to deal on the streets when, for example, social workers are not available at 4 o'clock on a Friday? Now, we can't just leave citizens having fights with their social workers and taxi drivers in the street. Something needs to be done. So I commend the approach that was taken by the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care earlier this week, which is very much about digitisation and system join-up. Any thoughts the panels might have on that would be great.
Brilliant. And just one other lady I saw in the further to the back had her hand up. Or was I imagining things? Yes, could you please stand up? Just your name and organisation, please.
Hi, I'm Emily Lawford from Prospect Magazine. This is for Lord Stevens. What's your impression of misogyny in the Met now? Do you think it's got worse over the last 20 years? What's the scope of the problem?
Very good. Lord Stevens, first off.
Thank you very much.
And all the other questioners as well, if you want to just wrap your answer.
I think, quite honestly, dealing with misogyny first, I think misogyny's always been there in the Met. I remember going to Northumberland as Chief Constable and being told that they had one woman in each CID office and saying, well, why was it only one woman? And being told that women didn't want to be detectives. A week later, I had every single woman officer in the main hall and asked how many people put their hands up want to be detectives. Half of them, there were about 400 or 500, put their hands up. I've seen misogyny in the Metropolitan Police over the years, and I think any woman who actually made her way to the top or to the reasonable ranks has been far better than the men who were there. In the aftermath of Macpherson, which was one of my main jobs to make the 37 recommendations to bring them in, I think it was year 1 or year 2 of my commissionership, a group of senior women officers came to me and said, you know, it's all very well, Commissioner, dealing with the racist side of things, but you can take it from me that misogyny is through this force and we suffer it, and women officers suffer it every day of the week. I said, okay, well, let's get groups of officers and I'll let them tell me what they think. And we went and did it at some races, and some of the stories that came through were appalling. Now, I don't believe that that has changed completely since my time, which is a long time ago now. I think it's always a battle that's going to have to be fought by women, and it's always a battle that those in power and in authority within the organisation have to keep an eye on. And I mean that, as it is with racism. In relation to walking down the street and the presence, I think we've talked through the importance of neighbourhood policing. And you've got to have a substantial amount of people on the ground, walking, talking, being part of the community. That's how policing works, to be part of the community. And there are not enough of them there now. It's an embarrassment that we don't have them on the streets. And just to talk about fraud, and I'll end up now. Trevor, you're absolutely right. 50% of crime that's committed in this country is fraud. 50%. And only 1% of policing resources goes to trying to prevent it and detect it. My own view is, and we talk about the Met having CT taken away from it, the National Crime Agency, the main thing at the moment is for the National Crime Agency to take on the fraud problems that are there. Unless that happens, it's going to spiral and spiral. So, you're right, Trevor, 50%, 1% resource towards it.
Bill Bratton.
On the issue of advancing women in policing, I think I stand on pretty firm ground in terms of my record and advocacy for that. Many of you are familiar with Kathy O'Toole. Effectively, I pulled out of the Boston Police Department to be my number 2 at the Metropolitan Police in Massachusetts when I was superintendent of that agency. And in the LAPD, NYPD, Boston Police Department, I'd be very comfortable with my record. I say that because one of the challenges for the next commissioner, who's going to be a man, that's the reality of it, he's going to have to fight like hell to basically encourage women to break through that glass ceiling that he will help them to do, and to push back against those who are going to basically try to batten down the hatches. That it's tough. It really is tough. It's a part of the cultural change that is essential to what needs to be done at the Met. One of the things that I think I'm known for in the United States is changing the cultures of the police organizations I go into, from reactive to proactive. On the issue of officers on the street, it's not so much that they're there, but what are they doing? This morning I had the experience, a good experience, to get stuck in front of Buckingham Palace at the changing of the guard. And I mean stuck. You cannot cross the streets when they're changing the guard as the mounted unit goes by or the bands march up. So I was very happy watching that. But I was also watching the officers. And I watch officers wherever I go. Ricky and I, when we were living in Los Angeles, there were so few police officers in that city, 9,000 in a city of 480 square miles, about half the size of what you have. You'd so seldom see a black and white that we used to refer to as a sighting. Well, I think other than down here in the center of London, a lot of people would refer to the lack of visibility of officers in other areas of the city as sightings. But it's not so much the lack of visibility, but what are they doing? And I watched the 2 young officers this morning, and by and large, the officers at the front of Buckingham Palace were young. And evidently, I think the average age of years of service is 4 years out in the street right now, because the older officers gravitate to the headquarters jobs and promotions, etc. I watched those 2 young officers, and all these tourists there, everybody having a good time. This was a festive event. And neither of them, in the 15 minutes I stood there, literally right beside him, waiting to be allowed to cross the street, ever engaged with anybody. Never looked at anybody. And they were facing the crowd, because that's what they're expected to do, they're there for security. But they didn't engage. What an ideal opportunity to chit-chat. How you doing today? Isn't this great? Type of thing. And it drives me crazy, it has throughout my career, when officers, they're present, but they're not engaged. I remember when I was police commissioner in New York City, and there were 2 officers specifically assigned to my neighborhood where I was living to deal with some street crime. And it was known that I'd be walking my dog at all hours of the night. I remember going out with Charlie and walking down Central Park West, and I'm the police commissioner. I have 2 officers walking up the street, and I said, oh, this is great, they're on patrol. And they literally walked right by me, and they didn't see me. They didn't see me, the police commissioner. No, so that visibility is one thing, but it is also the engagement. And that's part of the culture change, because they have become disengaged.
So Trevor.
Well, just very briefly, I mean, I agree with all that's been said, and particularly what Bill just said about what police officers do when they encounter, and there are lots of, John I think did his best to, I mean, just simple manners would be good, actually. There's not much of it about, but I think all of that matters. However, as I think many people in this room will know, I will not sugarcoat it and call it anything else, a complete obsession with the slaughter of young black men in this city. as I said earlier on, mostly by other young black men. I think it is, I can barely summon up the words to describe what a disgrace I think it is that we, frankly, and I know this is the sort of thing that gets me into terrible trouble, we can devote acres and acres of newsprint, hours and hours of TV, correctly to the death of young women, but that is happening every single week to this demographic, and we absolutely say nothing. Now, the reason I raise this is to come back to the point about how we deal with it. The truth of the matter is I grew up in the postcode in London, which for many years has had the worst ratio by a multiple of about 20, N22 4BH. Anybody who knows it, it's Wood Green Shopping Centre. I grew up as a child right behind it. You could not possibly, even with the numbers of the Stasi had, have enough police officers to be able to be on the spot when one of these things happens. You can't do it. What the successfully dealing with this elsewhere has been through things like, Bill, you'll know about situational awareness. It actually, the most modern tools that we have, and in this city we have more watching surveillance devices than anywhere else in the world, and we do not use these creatively and sensibly and intelligently. If we did one thing, next commission did one thing, it would be to become more literate in the use of the tools we currently have to tackle crime, rather than fighting the last century's battles on the pages of the Times or the Guardian or whatever it is. We could just start with that, then we might actually get people's confidence back.
Nick Timothy, final thoughts.
I thought the questions actually come together a little bit in a way. I mean, John's absolutely right about numbers. They do matter. No Home Secretary wants to take 20% out of policing budgets during their tenure. It was a matter of wider government policy, and we wrestled with this quite a lot, where when the spending review was first decided, all the senior policing officials, oh my God, like crime's going to go up, and don't put that in writing. Massive panics about how you deal with this. So constantly trying to find the right ways to get as much out of the number of officers that you have. And it's funny, I think central government is normally really reluctant to give away power and to localise, but if it has to cut budgets, it's actually much keener to do it, because it's somebody else's responsibility to take the decisions. But actually the police responded quite well, I think, in terms of restructuring and trying to protect as best they could the front line, however you define it. But we spent a lot of time, as a result, trying to think about productivity and how you improve things. And some of the ways in which you can improve productivity is actually it goes very well with some of the issues of fairness and justice that we talk about when the police interact with the public. So, for example, I think we touched on body-worn video earlier. The more body-worn video there is, the fewer complaints there are, the better both sides behave, the more time is saved. I did a fair amount of work in the Home Office on stop and search, and not against stop and search. It's a really important tool. It should be used where appropriate, but it's basically widely misused. A lot of the stops that were conducted when the issue was investigated when I was in the office, in the Home Office, I think it was 27% were carried out illegally. So there was a community relations thing and a trust thing that needed to be addressed. But it's also it's kind of boneheaded policing if all you're doing is just getting and stopping and searching some kids because you think you can, even though actually you probably can't. The law probably doesn't allow it. Because you have to, for understandable reasons, complete lots of forms and bureaucracy to explain why you use the power, it's incredibly time consuming. So if you're stopping and searching people for no apparent reason, then it's not only bad for community relations, it's bad for productivity. Mental health, the police end up picking up so many problems connected to mental health, which is a huge social problem. In my time, we tried really hard with the DOH and the NHS, and there were certain things we managed to get done. There was quite a lot that where we asked and didn't get. But I think as a society, we've got to think again about how we handle this. We think we're being incredibly kind by, you know, and nobody wants to go back to the institutions of the past, but we think we're being incredibly kind by not having facilities like those. But if you see some of the the poor suffering people who walk the same streets every day, think about some of the people in my own neighbourhood, then you know that we're not doing any good, but we're also creating these huge burdens for the police. And then I think that we're not very good on things like technology. So I think Trevor's just touched on this, but you know, if you're trying to deal with knife crime, then you know, things that business is increasingly just taking for granted about data analytics and trying to find out you know, information connected to times and locations, whether that's public transport, hospital data, and all these different things, are not used in the ways that they could be. The police spend a lot of time just sitting around in the courts because the court system is screwed up, full of delays. Equally, think about what ambulances were like in the 1990s, where they were basically just like fast vans. You had to sort of drive as fast as you could to a hospital. Now they're like mini hospitals full of incredible technology. Police cars, they're just still fast cars. There's plenty of stuff that can be done away from stations that would save police time. So numbers do matter. The burdens that the police have to pick up because of failures elsewhere, in particular mental health, really matter. But if you judge these things all in the round, you could do things that are socially useful, but also practically useful from the central objective of the police, which is to cut crime.
Brilliant, thank you. Fantastic panel, I'm sure you'll all agree. Sorry we've got to cut things short now, but thank you to Nick Timothy for taking the time at short notice to do this, to Sir Trevor always for being on our panel, to Lord Stevens, Bill Bratton for being Victor Ladorum for coming over from New York. Occasion. Please join me in expressing appreciation.